We're all millionaires, aren't we? You do know that, don't you? That we're all millionaires. Well, possibly multi-millionaires. I mean, some of us may even be billionaires, for all I know. We've all got a lot of money, but yet we're all worried, aren't we? And we're all concerned about paying certain bills and we get frustrated. Well, I've worked it out. I think I've worked it out, and I want to share this with you. So this might be a bit rambling, so please excuse this slightly rambling thing, but I think I've unravelled it all. You see, I was thinking about my dad. My dad's dead now, and when he died, of course, he had his house that had to be sorted out. He had some money in the bank that had to be sorted out. He had his will that had to be sorted out. And of course, he had a number of debts, you know, the council tax, utility bills, various bits and bobs. And his belongings had to be passed on or got shot of. And I was made the executor of his estate. It's pretty normal business, isn't it? Many of you may have done this. When a loved one goes, somebody has to take control, don't they, of that dead person's estate. And I would write out cheques on his behalf. I mean, he was dead. He couldn't write them out, clearly. So I would write them out from his the cheques from his bank. I mean, there was an arrangement, of course, in advance. So I would go and say, oh, to the utility bill, I'm sorry, my dad's dead now, and can I have the closing thing? And they would send it you, and you'd send off the money in a cheque, and I would sign it on behalf of my dad. He couldn't sign it because he was dead. Same with council tax and all these things. Until the house was sold, I continually had to pay the council tax out of my dad's estate. Now, I didn't pay for any of this out of my own money. Paid it out of Dad's money because he had enough in the estate to pay for all these things. We bought a skip and put whatever rubbish we didn't need into the skip as we emptied the house. The point being was, I didn't spend a penny. Luckily, Dad had enough money in the bank, but it was his money, you see. Even though he was dead, I was able to spend his money. Just hold that thought for a minute, because that's not complicated, is it? And now I think when you think about us, when we were born, this is pretty common knowledge now. A lot of people have been talking about this, but it seems pretty obvious now. I've unravelled it in my mind. It's taken a bit of time, but it's unravelled in my mind. When we were born, our parents went to the registrar, didn't they? And they informed them that they'd had a baby. They didn't have to do that. They were told by the government that they ought to, and they were threatened by a fine if they didn't. But, you know, being good citizens, I suppose, using citizens in the word that it's used, they went to the registrar and they informed of the birth of me. And they'd given me a name. It's not my name. I mean, you know, let's be honest, I am just some form of sentient being, some consciousness, if you like, that's inhabiting a physical flesh and blood body. I don't actually have a name. I'm a nameless spirit, if you like. But my parents decided there was this baby in front of them. They gave him a name and they said, oh, this is what we're going to call him, Richard. And so the registrar wrote all this down and formed a birth certificate, a unique document because it related to the day I was born and related to the parents from which I was born, and had this name attached to it, and it was written down. And this name has been associated with me. It isn't me. It's just this legal name, isn't it? It's not actually me. It's just a bit of paper with this legal name on it. You might call it a legal persona, this sort of entity, because I'm a living and breathing being, conscious, an unnamed spirit in this flesh and blood thing. But in order to sort of have corporations to interact with me, they've sort of had to give me this name. And it's important we think of it like that. But it's not me. Just like when my dad died, I was dealing with his name, the memory of him, if you like. but it wasn't him because he was flesh and blood and now he'd gone, but it was his name. So I was the executor of this legal estate. And that's effectively what happened when I was born. A legal estate had been created. Now, somebody, and I don't know whom, but some kind, generous, benevolent person decided to float this certificate, turn it into a bond by investing some money in it based on my life, you see, because I became stock. So this bond, this birth certificate, had some money put in, probably by the Treasury, I don't know, probably a corporation, and then floated on the stock market and was accruing money. And it's accruing money all my life. Now, of course, I'm the executor of that estate, basically, although as a baby, I didn't know about it. My parents should have known about it, but they weren't told. So they didn't know about it. And when I reached the age of majority, about 18, I ought to have been able to claim that estate, that with my name on it, just in the same way that my dad, so that there would be money for me that I could write checks and say, oh, I'd like a car, please. Take it out of the big money, this pool of money, this fund, this trust fund. Because that's effectively what it is. A trust fund had been set up when I was born. All of us have had this done. Now, I understand this has been done since the 1930s, 1933, I think. But it may go back to much, much older. But let's not worry too much about that. We know that this is true because there's the 12 presumptions of law. For example, all the law of the land in Western-speaking, English-speaking countries, it seems to me, are all run by canon law. Canon law, this is operated by the private bar guild. This is the lawyers, the judges, the barristers, the clerk of the courts themselves. They all run by this system. And the 12 presumptions of law, I made a video about this only the other day. And they say a whole load of, they presume a lot of things because they've got to make some presumption about you, haven't they? So they presume a bunch of things about you, and unless you correct them and say, oh no, actually that's not quite right, you made a presumption there, but it's not right, I rebut that, and then they go, oh, okay, fair enough, we've got to start by presuming something about you, like we do in all sort of walks of life. We all make a presumption, and let's face it, we see some people who dress up as men and they turn out that they want to actually be a woman. We don't know until they tell us, you know. So there's presumptions are made, and then there are these presumptions in law. And one of the presumptions in law is about the trust, that unless we tell them otherwise, they will assume that we are the trustee of this trust, not the executor. Now, the trustee, let's just have a quick think about trusts for a moment, because there's the settler who's put the money in. Now, I don't know what it is, but it might be that they put in, say, £100,000 into a trust fund when you're born. That money goes in, it's floated on the stock exchange, and it's accruing money. You wouldn't do it if it wasn't there to sort of make money. What would be the point? They may as well just put the money in the bank themselves. So they put the money into this trust. It's floated on the stock market, however it is, and it's accruing money. And this money, of course, has to be for somebody. It's not for the settler, because why are they putting it into a trust for somebody? A trust, you put the money in for a beneficiary. Well, who else is the beneficiary other than the name of the person in the trust? It has to be for the name on the person, this legal fiction, which is associated to you and you alone, because as I explained, it relates to the day that you were born by the two parents, can be nobody else, has to be you. It's in your name, the name that was given to you, that's associated with you. So there is this trust fund that's earning money, and the only person who can be the executor of that is you, because you've got the name, the legal persona, the name. The person who puts the money into trust, he's put it in for somebody else's benefit, which is you. So you are the executor and the sole beneficiary of this trust fund that's set up when you're born. It's there. You're a millionaire. multimillionaire, billionaire potentially, depending on how old you are. You see, the older you are, the more money's in the trust. It's that simple. When you reach 18, there's probably several £100,000, maybe more, maybe £1 million. It's been around for 18 years, accruing money, you see. But you don't know this. So in the 12 presumptions, they're saying that unless you rebut it, you take the position of trustee. Well, the trustee is the one that has to pay all the bills and has to settle any accounts. So if you've got, I don't know, a tax bill or a council tax bill or a parking speeding or a speeding ticket or any of these things, these bills that come in, or a utility bill, you know, gas, electric, a phone bill, all these things that we use. Unless you rebut it, you become the trustee and you think you've got to pay for these things. And you do, don't we? Out of our own private funds, funds that we've gone to work and earned. We didn't need to do that at all because the money is sitting there ready to be paid. So we rebut the fact that we're the trustee. No, we're not the trustee. The trustee is actually the Treasury in that case. It's the person, it's the other person that's not you in any of these situations. So when your bills come in, the council tax or the utilities, and they're demanding the money, they're the trustee. They're the ones that got to sort it all out, and you give them the authority to do so. So when the bill comes in and they say, oh, can you pay? You don't pay it out your private fund as we've all been doing stupidly because we've assumed, oh, that's how the world works. But you've got this trust fund. The fund is just sitting there. You've got the authority to say, look, hang on a minute, let me just introduce myself. I am actually the executor of this legal estate, just like I did when I was looking after my dead dad. My dead dad couldn't write out the checks because he was dead. This legal fiction, the estate, the Richard Vobes on a bit of paper that relates to a birth certificate that has a trust fund, can't write it out because it's just on paper. It's a dead entity, has no ability. But me, as a sentient, nameless being in flesh and blood that has been associated and granted all of this and is the sole beneficiary, has to be the executor. So I can make the executive decision to say to the trustee, which could well be whoever has sent me the bill, say, look, I give you permission to go to the Treasury, which, like in my case with my dad, was the bank. It's like saying, yep, please pay off this debt, and it comes out of that money. Do you see what I mean? I mean, it's very simple, isn't it, really? Once you get your head round it, it's incredibly simple. We've been duped all this life to think that we have to take it out of our private funds. But we don't. We're the executor of this dead fiction's estate. We just tell the trustee, the person who's asking for the money, go, yeah, no problem. Thank you very much. No problem at all. Go and get the money from the Treasury. So I didn't set it up, did I? I didn't set it up. I didn't ask to have it set up, but I've been put in this position where there's this trust fund and I am the executor of it. Just as I didn't ask my dad to set up his bank account and have all those bills, but he made me the executor of it so that when he died, I could pay it all off. And it's the same. But you see, because they presume that we don't know this and they don't tell us, they're the ones that fraudulently get the benefit from this money. The money is sloshing about there. They get the use of the money. And they laugh at us for going into our own private funds, having to work so hard. I mean, effectively, you could buy yourself a nice brand new top-of-the-range car and just say, no problem. Is that the bill? Yes, I'll write you a credit note because actually I'm a multi-millionaire. There we are. Go to the credit. There's my signature. It proves that I am it proves that this legal fiction exists. I've given you permission. Go and collect the money. Now, whether or not they'll do this is another question that we need to work out. But they ought to, because we can rebut it in law. We can rebut it in the courts. We don't need to pay these out of our own private accounts because we're actually multi-millionaires and we just don't know it. Cheers. This should have been champagne, shouldn't it? Not coffee.